Hello there, you're welcome again to my YouTube channel, and today we're going to be discussing the quantitative command of evidence question as hinted at in the previous video on this playlist. But today we'll be focusing exclusively on the quant part of the evidence-based question, right? And we're going to be learning two things. First of all, we're going to be learning the 5 tips to help you deal with this question type efficiently. We are also going to be learning how to identify quantified data, because this happens to be the issue with many students. Once they see the quant command of evidence and they see the complex graph and chart, they are put off immediately. Oh, this is looking too complex. It's looking mathematical. Trust me, there is nothing mathematical about the quant command of evidence question. You are applying the same tips as in the previous question type, the textual kind of this question type, but then you are applying these tips with particular sense to the data presented in the chart. So you're going to be learning how to read data in today's video as well. So you want to grab your pen and get ready for an important ride. So I think we should begin this session by understanding the charts or the graph. Remember, there are no mathematical principles involved, no complex data. You only have to apply the same simple reading trick, right? So the 3 parts to focus on. First of all, the title. The title a lot of times can be so detailed that you wouldn't even have to read all the other unimportant details on the text, because yes, the title is clear. The title, as we have here, says Economic Policy Uncertainty in the United Kingdom. So this is simply the uncertainty about economic policies in the UK within these years, 2005 to 2010. That taken out of the way. What other part are you looking at? The labeling. What is labeling? Labeling is simply the coloring, the shapes that signify details. So it is often at the bottom of the chart. So at the bottom of those charts, we have different labels for different policies. The light black represents tax and public spending policy. The gray color represents trade policy. General economic policy is represented by the thick black color. So we see these bars, the black, the light black, and the gray represent these different policies, and I know which represents which now. That taken out of the way. The final part to look at are your y and x axis. The y axis here says this is uncertainty, and of course the higher the number, the more uncertain that area is. And the x axis just shows you the dates, the different years analyzed. That is it. So putting all of these together now, we see that this chart simply represents economic policy in different areas, which are tax and public spending policy, trade policy, general economic policy within the years 2005-2010. Simple. This is some of the tricks I teach on the task 1 of the academic writing on the IELTS, by the way. But that's of course by the way. Now we have understood what this chart is, right? This is not the first thing you may need to do dealing with the question, by the way. But just so you come down to the point of matching options to graph, you should understand the most important parts of the graph to look at. Now, let's delve right into the other tips, the 5 tips to help you deal with this question efficiently. Now, the first thing you want to know is identify the question. Be sure that the question is asking you to support or to oppose or to complete a blank, which I find to be the easiest. Completing the blank I find to be the easiest, because you only have to just focus on that claim preceding the blank, the claim preceding the blank, right? So for this question now, we are completing the blank obviously because we have a blank at the end of the text, and the question has not to illustrate the claim. Obviously the claim is mentioned before the blank, so the next thing you want to do is understand that claim, get that claim and understand it. Now, the claim is of course the sentence preceding the blank. One revelation of her work is that a general measure may not fully reflect uncertainty about specific areas of policy, obvious as in the case of the United Kingdom, where general economic policy uncertainty dash. So obviously we're looking for anything that says general economic policy is quite at variance, is quite different, whether it is way larger or way lower than other areas. So I've come down to the third tip without even knowing it, which is of course predicting what my answer should look like. Now down to the options. Let's select the option that matches that claim and my prediction I just made. The first one says option A, general economic policy. Whatever option I'm choosing, I am reading it into the sentence just for grammatical coherence, right? General economic policy aligned closely with uncertainty about tax and public spending is obviously wrong already. General economic policy must not be the same as other areas. A is wrong for the claim. I'm not even bothered to look at this in the graph at all, as definitely at this point it is already wrong. How the ones we cannot see well represented on the chart we have. So beginning with option B, was substantially lower than uncertainty about tax and public spending policy. This is, by the way, the last thing we're doing, which is trying to justify each of the points in the charts, right? Each of the options in the charts. So was substantially lower than uncertainty about tax and public each year. That is obviously not true. General policy represented by the tick black, and obviously it was not substantially lower. At some point it was even higher than the other areas. 2010, 2009, 2008, for example, it was higher than trade policy. So that eliminates option B. It is not justified. Option C reached its highest level between 2005 and 2010 in the same year that uncertainty about trade policy and tax. So yes, so I want to be sure that it reached its highest level. General economic policy reached its highest level in the same year that the other areas reached their lowest level. That is obviously not true. So if in 10, for example, where general economic policy was at its highest, other parts were not low. Tax and public spending policy was very high. It was even way higher at that point. 5, for example, where general policy was a little high, right? The other policies were even higher. They were not lower, as opposed to what we have in option C. So option C, well eliminated. All part of option C, very wrong. Option D was substantially lower than uncertainty about trade policy in 2005 and substantially higher than uncertainty about trade policy in 2010. So let's see, substantially lower than uncertainty about trade policy in 2005, first of all. So that first part, right? It is lower, of course. General economic policy is lower than tax and public spending in 2005. But then I wouldn't say this level is substantial anyway, but then it is low, and that is the only true detail we can see on the charts when you compare with the other options. So we'll hold on to that. Let's see whether the other part is even well or better represented. Okay, and substantially higher than uncertainty about trade policy in 2010. Substantially higher in 2010. Obviously, it's in 2010, general economic policy was very high in comparison to the trade policy. So option D is our best answer. Remember, sometimes we don't get a perfect answer. We just always are looking for the best in the list. So the best among the options we have here so far is option D. Others are not well represented on the chart, and we see how that happened. Right? Yes. Helps you deal with this question type more confidently. Remember, I can't say enough how important it is for you to practice. So get access to a workbook. I talked about my workbook in the previous video. You want to make recourse to that, and you can use Khan Academy. There is Blue Book to practice with as many questions as possible. The more often you practice these tips, you notice that they become a part of you over time, especially when you have at least a month before the exam to prepare. So until we meet in another video where I will be dealing with another question type, I hope you keep practicing, and I wish you the very best on your test.